I'm Niamh Fitzgerald. I'm the Surveys and Volunteers Project Officer with BirdWatch Ireland. And just a disclaimer that the talk today will focus a good bit on birds, but I've tried to include lots of different species. But the beauty is when you help one species or species group, invariably others will benefit, and that will show through the various different topics that we cover today. So, for example, planting food plants for birds will increase insect populations, hence providing food and shelter for other species like bats, hedgehogs, etc., as well as it will improve the soil quality. So small actions that you take for one thing will have knock-on effects throughout the chain. And there will be a lot of information within this talk, but so you don't have to try to remember it all and don't be overwhelmed. But the video will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards, and there is going to be a list of resources that are shared. Because I am by no means a gardening expert, and this won't just center on gardening, i.e. planting, etc. So we will signpost you towards some resources that you can use to dig deeper into the various topics. So this will just kind of introduce some of the things that can be done to allow you to kind of figure out where you can start, really. For the garden illiterate people like myself, just knowing what you can do and how best to launch into that. So yeah, on a global scale, we're losing species at a rapid rate, and we're experiencing an extinction similar to that of the dinosaurs. Species of all types are declining in Ireland. 56% of native Irish plants have declined in range and or abundance. Native grassland plants have suffered the most, so they might get overlooked, but we've lost a lot of them. 63% of bird species have declined. Farmland birds are experiencing the most severe declines, and there's been massive declines in insects across different groups. So, and this is because of several different factors on a habitat level, but really the overarching message is that wildlife is being squeezed out and they don't have anywhere to go. And the places that they go aren't providing them with diverse enough kind of mosaic of landscapes and things that they need to keep them going, as this graphic kind of implies. When there isn't enough diversification, it doesn't cater to a wide range of biodiversity. So what can we do to turn the tide on this? Like, what can we, little old me sitting in my house at home, do to help and improve this situation? It's really about making space for nature. So protecting what's already there, that's really important. We don't just want retrospective action, we want to protect what's already there, because that will always be the best quality for wildlife. And then for people who have access to balconies or gardens or help manage a green space, invite wildlife into these gardens. For the purpose of the talk, I'm going to refer to these as gardens, but you yourself will know what that space means for you, and whether it's a balcony or a little local green space. For the sake of this talk, it'll be your garden. So yeah, whatever interest it may be, birds, bats, bugs, or all of the above, just allow yourself to be captivated by nature. That's a really meaningful action to start out with. Recognizing its importance and that it needs to be protected is hugely important and a very meaningful thing that you can do. Yeah, so compiled a list of resources, so we'll share it afterwards anyway. So you by all means take notes if you want, but you don't need to try and take away every single thing that I've said today. Just the main message that I want you to walk away with it is that you can do something. There's a range of different things for a range of different spaces that will benefit wildlife at various different levels. So it's just a starting point. The basic needs of nature across the board are protection from things that are trying to kill or eat it, nourishment, and shelter from the elements, same as what we get from our homes. And just as with all life, also water is really important, access to water, and diversity is important for organisms, ourselves included. We need a healthy mix of food and sources of habitats to satisfy all the different needs that animals have and plants have. So have a think, how many of these do you already have in your garden? And if there's anything missing, what can you do to provide it? So keep that in your mind as we go through the various topics. This is a gorgeous long-tailed tit, my favorite garden bird. Beautiful little species with a nice little like subtle hint of pink mascara or pink eyeshadow. They're beautiful and like little flying cotton balls, captivate the hearts of so many. But this one here is raising its chicks in a gorse plant. So long-tailed tits, they nest in trees, but also scrub plants. And they don't make their nests out of twigs. They nest in a dome, like rugby ball shaped structure, often with a closed roof made of moss, lichen, and feathers. But they're all bound together with spider web. It's a really small little nest, like about the size of a fist. Really closest to my size fist. The nest is soft, and this helps keep the long-tailed tit's tail intact. The spider web acts like an elastic, so that it grows with the little birds as they grow, which is really important because the tails help keep them balanced in flight. And if the little baby birds left the nest with their tails in ratty order, like so many other species, they wouldn't be able to fly very well. So this is a really cool adaptation for this species. But the insects in general, not only pollinate plants and all of those amazing things that you hear about them, but they also serve as food for spiders. And without spiders, the long-tailed tits wouldn't have the webs to hold their elasticated nests together. So it just goes to show the interconnectedness of nature. And there are examples everywhere you look. And that's, from your little street corner to your garden. Once you start looking, you'll find fascinating examples everywhere you go. So I think that it's undeniable there's a strong case to be made as to why you should do this to serve biodiversity when it's in such under such threat. But what's in it for you? Well, healthy ecosystems are more stimulating. They increase concentration, they reduce the mental fatigue, and restore cognitive function, like memory within us, which are crazy, like very digital heavy worlds that we live in now. We need this. So more biodiverse spaces play larger roles in reducing pollution and regulating temperatures and generally slowing the effects of climate change in various different ways. But not only that, the color green is good for you. And no, I'm not talking about money. Your brain chemically changes when you look at the color green. Your heart rate drops, your stress hormones reduce, your brain begins to settle. And through evolution, green has signaled safe zones, forests that imply water and shade and food and rest. So it makes sense. But a quick look at green triggers safe mode in your brain. It's even better quality when it's outside or when you're looking at something natural, plants, forests, what have you. But even short interactions with green will calm your nervous system. So you'll be doing yourself a favor if you invite more green and more nature into your garden and into your life. And there's also an interesting study from Czech Republic that showed the less diverse that a habitat is, the bigger increase there is in pest populations. So in this case, it was voles. So in particular, like rodent populations will tend to explode, and they have these really big rise and falls in their populations. So like it doesn't happen in the landscapes that have a broad range of predators and biodiversity. Um, so the point is that mixed vegetation reduces pests and generally makes for a more balanced and more healthy environment. Um, and because nature is being pushed to the fringes, and we need to find avenues to help them in any way that we can. With roughly 2 million gardens across the country, there's huge potential to create this network of little wildlife refuges in our gardens that could have a really significant impact on our wildlife. And gardens of big and small can play a part. So whether it's just a little window box or a 2 acre garden or your little community space, there's huge scope to do something to help. And Juanita Brown produced this Gardening for Biodiversity guide that is, it's a really easy read. It's a wonderful, easy to digest guide produced for the Heritage Council, available in English and in Irish. And there's also a little colouring book connected to it. So you can get double the calming effect, do some colouring while you're out in nature, surrounded by green. Okay, so you're sold on the idea. You want to help wildlife. You've loved my pitch. But where do you start? Well, the first step is to consider your space. What's already there that you can protect and you can nurture? What is your space like in terms of altitude and exposure to light and wind? What is around your garden in terms of other gardens, hedgerows, fields, what have you? And again, like, do you have kids or pets you need to consider in terms of whether you're going to put in a pond or not? Are these things safe? Do you own the space? So if what you do now, like, is that going to be able to continue throughout time? Consider future management of the space. Like, is a tree you planted going to take over the garden in 10 years? Does this plant need to be contained lest it run wild and take over the whole garden? So a great way to kind of start out is to map out your garden, and then you can map out what you want it to look like if you're that way inclined. But this will give you a better idea as to what actions will suit your space, and you can take it from there. Just a note to say that your maps do not need to be as detailed as in this image. You don't need to be an architect to undertake this. Any old little scribbles will do the job. So one of the major things to consider, as I mentioned, all life relies on water. And in Ireland, it's really easy to overlook the importance of water as we have such an abundance of rain and miserable weather so much of the time. But water sources are actually more scarce now than they have ever been before. We have lost 90% of our wetlands. So wildlife is limited to their options as to where they can get water. So it's really beneficial to provide it for them. And it will also help invite aquatic species into your garden and provide space for them, which is limited. So ponds are one thing that you can do. They're really high impact, great way, a good bang for your buck, and introducing a little water body is a very effective way to boost biodiversity. Regardless of the size of your space, you can add a pond of some sort or a little water feature. And often these have benefits for you as well. And one of which is the calming effect. So being near water is also good for you. And it's good for our brains. It fosters calm and creativity, and it's a great focal point to watch nature, and it's just a very peaceful thing to have in your life. Ponds benefit pretty much the whole spectrum of biodiversity: amphibians, frogs, and newts, of course, but also plants, birds, insects, bats, and in an ever growing sea of concrete is a really important point. Collie Ennis, the Trinity College Biodiversity Officer, Crittershed podcaster, creator, and generally fantastic advocate of nature, wrote some great advice on this topic in our members magazine, Wings, back in 2018. So I've broken down some of the points here, and that'll be shared in the resources too. So colleagues suggest you consider these 4 things if you're wanting to put a wildlife pond in your garden. Consider pond placement. Try to avoid locations where the pond will be in full sun or shade for too much of the day. Shading the pond with floating plants and tall grass can help with exposure if you don't have natural shade or it's too exposed where you have to put it in your garden. And avoid overhanging plants because too many leaves can clog up the pond, but it'll also generally overshadow the water. Consider materials and size, and this will be decided largely depending on your space and how much effort you want to put into it at that moment in time. You could always start small and work up to something bigger. If you have a small space, you can just use a plastic tub. And this can be new or secondhand, so like an old basin you don't use anymore or found in a skip, or something that you got in a DIY store. But just make sure what you're using is watertight and that it's clean. So make sure to clean off any chemicals from it. And then when you're adding stones to it, be sure not to crack it. You can also make raised ponds with tubs, but just be sure to cover them up with wood or stone or moss plants, because the plastic will degrade over time if it's exposed to the elements. And then for larger ponds, you're limited really by your imagination and the size of your space. In terms of the shape you choose, that's totally up to you, but curved edges do look really nice and more natural, and they provide more surface area for critters who like to hang out on the edges. Size is not prescriptive, but this is a good rule of thumb that Kelly has given to dig 2 to 3 foot in the middle, deep in the middle, and then gradually come out as you go to the edges. Liners can be found in DIY stores, but check the size and the price of these before you begin, because that will help dictate your project, the scale of your project as well. Rainwater it's best to fill your pond with rainwater, as tap water can have chemicals and cause algae. But if there's no alternative, that's okay, because the chemicals will disappear over time, after a few days. You can also divert water from your rainwater pipe if you want a continuous feed, but just make sure that you're set up that if there's overflow, it'll go somewhere that's not going to affect the foundations of your house or the hard structures around your house. And you'll find out a little bit later, but there are also bog gardens, which you can do in tandem with ponds, so as to allow for that overflow. And also they included in the resources is a link to one of these alternative liners, a geosynthetic clay liner, which if you're trying to avoid plastic, that could be an option. So it's really important also to incorporate a way for critters to get out of the pond. So things like hedgehogs that fall in don't get stuck with no way out. And then once you have your pond set in, it's time to add plants. Provide cover around the edges with the likes of water lily and marsh marigold, and then fully aquatic plants should do the job of providing oxygen, injecting a bit of oxygen into the water. Hornwort is really good for this. Seems to be the top pick for a lot of people who have undertaken building a pond. And if you get the plants right, you won't need a pump, which can suck up tadpoles and other critters. And it's easy maintenance. You only need to cut back the plants once a year. So it can kind of be as involved as you like, as you're willing to invest into it. Also think about think about safety when you're deciding about a pond. If you have little ones around, or anyone or anything else you need to be concerned might fall into it. Fence off the area. If you have little ones, it's easiest to place at an edge or a corner. If you do need to block it off, and this also can help protect the pond from extreme heat or frost. And also if your dog has flea treatment, be careful not to let them go in the water, because this can poison the water. The chemicals can poison the water. So there's a lot to consider, but there's a lot of really helpful guides out there as well. And then if a pond isn't for you right now, or you also want to do take some other actions, here's some additional ways which you can introduce water to your garden. So shallow water trays with stones provide drinking for insects and birds, but make sure to change this water often, as it's not to be a stagnant water source. Also, you can provide hoverfly lagoon, just a container with grass cuttings, sawdust, or leaf litter and water in it. This provides egg-laying space for hoverflies, which will then be eaten by your birds, which is great for urban spaces that lack aquatic habitats. And also, even just window boxes with damp compost can support insects and nocturnal pollinators, which is an amazing addition. There is lots of different ways you can go about rain chain or downpipe little micro wetlands. One example that I've had some involvement with in a voluntary capacity is the social enterprise Understory are carrying out a really cool project catching raindrops in Ringsend at the moment. And these divert water from the drains directly into these planters, which are specially made for the project. And then they're planted up with moisture-loving plants, which will help reduce pressure on the local sewage systems, because this water are going into these planters instead of down into the drains. And it also reduces sea pollution. It'll help, these plants will attract pollinators and biodiversity and just generally brighten that hard urban environment, which will in turn have an effect on people's well-being and the mood. So here's an example of the first planter that was installed at the Mary Cobbler. And here is one of the planters that has been planted up and is thriving at the moment. So it can be really beautiful and really functional way to introduce a little bit of wildlife, but also capture that water and like make it work for us humans as well. There's no reason these things shouldn't benefit us too, because we're also feeling the effects of climate change. And there's also drain pipe wetlands and rain gardens. At WWT have some really nice guidance and videos on creating these, and bog gardens, which are included in the list of resources. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but they're really nice complement if you decide to do green roof as well. But I will tell you a little bit more about bog gardens, which I think are fascinating and like a really impactful action that you could take if you have a space that accommodates it. And as I mentioned earlier, it can be a really nice accompaniment to a pond, especially if you're feeding it with your rainwater and letting it overflow. Then you can let it overflow into this little mini wetland and it will absorb some of that water. So it's a stepping stone that kind of connects dry areas and wet areas. It acts as a transitional habitat in your garden. Within a small area, it can offer a range of moisture conditions and support a rich diversity of plants, which will obviously in turn then have effect on lots of other things, insects in particular. So you can use a half barrel or container for it as well. And choose a location that has as much sun as possible. Gravel will help prevent the soil from blocking the drainage holes. And if your soil is free draining, that's perfect. You can just use it as it is. Otherwise, you might want to introduce some clay soils. And as I said, you can divert your downwater pipe into it, but make sure it won't back up onto hard surfaces. So the difference with this is it's just a little bit of soil. So there's no kind of hard retaining surface like you have with a pond with your hard liner or your your bucket. So yeah, introduce a mix of short and tall plants. Include grass and sedges. Hemp agarone is a good plant that would be really useful in this context and in the pond settings in general. And when you introduce your plants to this, first keep watering them until they're established, and you'll be onto a winner. So this acts as natural water storage and will improve the climate resilience of your own garden and provide that amazing habitat space for insects, amphibians, and birds. And yeah, providing water for birds is really important because they need to drink and wash, and water can be difficult to find in winter. Make it easy for them, like it'll help them conserve energy if they don't have to go far afield looking for water, and helps if you put in stones or wood so that smaller birds and smaller critters can also use it. But be sure to replace the water regularly so disease doesn't build up in it and spread through the different populations using it. And also don't let it freeze. Just provide a shallow dish, but not under feeders. You don't want all that mess falling into it from the feeders. Very easy win. You can just fill a bowl with different sized pebbles, add water, and hey presto, you've got a little place for your bees to land on and to have a little drink. I'm sure some other species will avail of it too. So there's some really easy ways that you can go about even just using like waste products or like your household recycling to provide some water. For this, because it's that kind of like fragile plastic, I would suggest changing it out regularly if you're, especially if you're using yogurt pots a lot. Just punch a hole and turn it onto a plate. And then even things you might have lying around, like discarded stuff, can be useful to provide to create these little garden features. So just an upturned bin lid, some stones and rocks, and some water. There's loads of really easy ways to go about it. You can get creative, but providing water is one of those top things that you can do and can cater to so many different things and benefit so many different things. Another thing you can do is planting for nature. So this will hit a lot of your different needs: shelter, nesting space, and roosting space, and be a natural food source. And if you're providing a big diversity of species, then hopefully you can have food in as many months as possible. So think about things that come into flower and berry at different times of the year as well. For natural food sources for birds, we've broken it down into a few different categories. Go for natives if possible, but the most important thing is to avoid invasives. So you can be purist and try for only natives, but yeah, the most important thing is that you avoid things that are going to spread like wildfire and take over. So non-native plants are not inherently bad, but it's just the ones that are invasive and outcompete our native species that are the problem. So berry bearing bushes, challenging to say that 5 times in a row. These are really great food sources. The highlight here, holly. If you want holly, make sure to plant male and female close to one another so that you get berries. But these are like food source for the holly blue caterpillar and thrushes, and also their spiky leaves provide nice little protection and nesting cover. Hawthorn also is great all-rounder, real stalwart of our native hedges, and it provides food and nesting space, and the berries will be eaten by insects and by birds. thrushes in particular. Climbers are a really important one as well, and you can have a bit of fun with climbers in terms of a garden feature. You know, putting them on a trellis, or sometimes you want to avoid putting them up a wall, but there's lots of different ways you can go about it. Ivy is such an underrated species. Our native ivy is, like, if that was in all gardens, we'd be winning. It provides nesting space and supports a range of insects. Lots of stuff eat the berries and the buds and things, and it flowers in sunlight, providing late food source for pollinators and birds. So these late sources are really important, because you need to think about things that will be providing food when other stuff isn't. And fruit trees are just a wonderful thing to have in your garden for your own sake as well. So great for wildlife and for yourself, which is, you know, peak in terms of garden design. Crabapple is a great one that blossoms for bees and bullfinches. Bullfinches are beautiful coral little birds, dark black head, always a joy to see. I think they captivate the hearts of many. But also moth larvae feed on the leaves, and the apples are eaten by pretty much all the thrushes. And a bonus as well, it's a small tree that's suitable for smaller gardens. So very dynamic. Trees, there's lots of different options. You'll need to consider the kind of space that you have. For willow, of which there are loads of different types of species of willow itself, but it caters to hundreds of insects, and the seeds are also eaten by the insects too. So that's a really good one to introduce, and they're generally quite good with wet weather. Important to consider also the maintenance of mature trees. So some of our mature trees are really old, and it's important to retain those anywhere that we can. They're great for connectivity, so for birds and squirrels and other species moving between spaces. And they support loads of different species, birds, bats, insects. They're an important roost. They're important for roost sites for bats, which will squidge themselves into these little cracks in the trunks. So if you have an old tree that's creaking at the knees, please consider cutting the limbs off to stabilize it, or stabilizing it in some other way, as opposed to just cutting the trunk. Obviously consider safety, but if retention is possible, it's always advised. And then keeping seed heads. So, you know, there are a lot of different plant species that will be considered weeds, which are essentially just plants that are growing where you don't want them. But again, beautiful bullfinches benefit greatly from, you know, the retention of these kind of plants. They love dandelions, one of their favorite foods. They have little like secateur bills that they will like cut away at blossoms, and there's plenty of other species, beautiful species like goldfinches, again another fan favorite, who adore dandelions and teasels and thistles, etc. So definitely leave seed heads and grow seed heads where you can. And then there's a lot of insects that will have like a special affinity for particular plants. Some will only lay their eggs on particular plants. You know, some will only feed on particular plants. So it's really important that we provide for these things, so we don't lose those species. We don't let them go extinct in time. So some of the ones to consider are common hogweed and even common nettle. Probably considered a pest by many, and we've all been stung by a nettle in the past and cursed its name. But as far as habitat and plants go, they're really crucial. They're a food plant for lots of different butterflies, and their eggs are laid in the patches of nettles, and there are several bird species that feed on the seeds as well. And also this I'm not sure if you will have noticed this little insect on the nettle leaf, but that's actually, even though it looks a little gross, it's a 7-spot ladybird larvae. So that grows into the ladybirds, which we all know and love. So yeah, important to provide these plants for our favorite species and the ones that we might overlook. Hedgerows are really important. Again, might be something that gets overlooked, but they're crucial. They're a crucial habitat type in Ireland, and they're unique to this part of the world. They're not found throughout the world, mostly kind of in Ireland and North Western Europe. And they kind of act as wildlife, as roadways for wildlife. Bats use them to navigate along, and like a lot of species will move through them and hide out in them. So they're really important. But also they're really connected quite strongly to our heritage and folklore throughout time. They were used as ancient field boundaries, and still are in many cases, but dating back centuries. So trees like hawthorn and elder are linked to the good people, i.e. the fairies, and were rarely cut. And they're also, often bountiful. They can be full of brambles, which are amazing for your blackberries. So they really are kind of an all-rounder because they provide protection, shelter, and bountiful food. So if you're growing a hedge or fostering a hedge, make sure there's mixed species, allow it to grow tall, and try to connect it up as much as possible with other features, so that it really provides that highway for birds and other wildlife to travel along. And something that's often overlooked then, and where it all begins, is the soil. But this is really crucial to us and to everything else. Within the soil, there lives a vast web of microbes, fungi, and invertebrates. And with the use of chemicals and things, these have really reduced, which threatens a lot of things and reduces the minerals and the nutrients in the soil. If you have a patch of soil, try not to leave it bare, because that will lead to a rapid loss of carbon and nutrients. And ground cover. So yeah, provide some ground cover that protects against rain and runoff, because healthy soils underpin the whole food security and biodiversity recovery. Okay, so then feeding birds some less natural food sources. We can cater to lots of different types of birds with bird feed. Not all of them, but a number of birds will benefit from this. So my preference is sunflower seeds. I think if you're just putting out one thing, this leads to quite a high diversity of species that will use it. And it's kind of a middling price, but it's high in calories. So yeah, you get good results for your money. And there's also very little waste, especially if you're using the sunflower hearts, which just have the husks removed. And peanuts. Peanuts are great for general appeal. The tits and the biggers, finches, sparrows, and now the woodpeckers are spreading across the country. They also love peanut. And there's kind of no mess because the whole thing gets eaten, which you will need to use them with these specialized feeders, and make sure there's a nice small mesh so they can be they'll be broken up, and the birds won't choke on pieces that are too big. You can also provide mealworms that will be eaten by things like the insectivorous species like robins and wagtails. And it's good at this time of year for like supplementary feeding for nesting robins. A lot of small birds will get fed on grub species, not seeds. So caterpillars are super important for a lot of our small nesting birds and our bigger nesting birds. Fat balls they're just kind of calories. So they are they're good in the cold weather, but they're best if you provide them with other foods, as they don't really contain any nutrients. Some cheap ones you have to look out for because they can use like ash fillers, and never give them in warm weather because when the fat melts, it can stick to birds' feathers and cause them issues with flying. Mixed seeds are cheap and easy, and they will attract a variety of species. Not as good and as high quality as the nuts and the peanuts and the sunflower flowers. And then Niger, which is a like fine thistle like seed, is expensive, and it's rich in oils. It's loved by like goldfinches and siskins, and the finches. It does need a special feeder, but it's messy and it does travel quite far. Niger is typically grown in Africa, so really, if you were looking to draw in goldfinches, they love like the dandelions, the teasels, and the thistles, all the same kind of feeds. So you could provide them as an alternative. Also consider what's in your kitchen. Like these any of the fruits you could put out. The blackbirds and other thrushes will love them, as well as blackcaps. Often these kind of ground feeding species will go for them. If you're putting like raisins and currants, soak them so they'll be easier to eat, and you can include them in fat bowls too. Especially in the snowy weather, it can be good to put out like mild grated cheese, throw it on the ground for these hedgerow species like wrens and dunnocks and robins. Uncooked porridge oats can be good, and also cooked rice, but make sure it's unsalted. Always make sure you're giving birds unsalted food. The diversity is key. Different birds, different foods will cater to different birds, and different foods will work differently at different times of year. Some birds prefer to feed on a flat surface, but we're advising to avoid that because disease can spread easier on these surfaces, like you see the house sparrows on in the bottom right. So multiple feeding stations, and also providing multiple feeding stations with different types of food will reduce the infighting at the feeders. So our advice is only feed peanuts and seeds in November and April to help suppress the spread of disease. Only use small amounts of food, so with the likes of peanuts, for example, so they're not going moldy. Don't use feeders with flat surface. Keep feeders clean, and yes, clean your feeders regularly, and only put out water if you can change it every day. It's not inherently a problem to have other species using your feeders, but they're not typically your target species, and you can go through quite a lot of seed quite quickly if it's all being eaten by squirrels and crows. So one solution is to buy or make a cage feeder. You can do this with two hanging basket cages, hanging basket wires, and just tie them together around a feeder. Or you can get them from the BirdWatch shop or elsewhere. And also, if you're trying to deter mammals, so your rats and your squirrels, you can add chili powder to your feed, unsalted. This mammal taste buds are different to birds, so that they don't like the taste of it, but birds don't detect it. The spice doesn't bother them. And also, if you have your feeders hanging on a pole, like a metal pole, you can grease the base of it with olive oil so they just like slip down off it. The squirrels and the rats when they try to climb up. So addressing the elephant in the room, BirdWatch Ireland is in discussions about our position on the ethics of feeding garden birds from these feeders. It's a nuanced topic, and we want to make sure we understand all the ins and outs. A member raised it to us again recently that we need to have a position on this, and I totally agree. So there is going to be a statement released on that shortly. But for now, I can at least just highlight some of the pros and cons. So the pros of bird feeders are that it makes it easier for people to see birds. They kind of bring them out in the open and closer to us, so that it allows more people to connect with birds and increases that empathy and advocacy for the protection of nature. And it provides natural food sources, it provides food when natural food sources are low, which is obviously one of the crucial points. So it can help birds survive these cold snaps, in particular the smaller, kind of more vulnerable species. But then the cons, which are significant in particular for some species, such as greenfinch and some of the other finch species, are declining because of disease, such as Trichomonas gallinae, which is parasitic flatworm, and part of how they share this disease and pick it up is at feeders and sometimes water tables. And feeders do only serve certain species at a specific time of year, and a lot of money can be spent on them. A lot of air miles can be traveled by the food, so from a sustainability point of view, you need to consider that. It can potentially create this kind of unnatural type of competition between species, and some research has suggested, not research from Ireland, that it might influence the morphology of species, like their beaks, for example. But in my opinion, more research is needed for us to make a fully informed decision on, is feeding acceptable in some circumstances or not at all. It's important to have this information from specifically an Irish context and not just from the UK, because we do have different suite of species and it's not like for like in all cases. So I don't have a clear answer for you now, but will say that natural, especially native, will always be best. And providing for much more like plants will provide for much more biodiversity and can address all of their basic needs, with shelter and nesting, and not just supplementary feeding. But Jack Badams, who raised this on Springwatch and made the topic kind of go viral, put it quite well. He said, we have taken away their natural food and now we need to replace it. So in my opinion, whether or not you decide to put out bird feeders, I couldn't agree with him more. There's nothing like the real thing. And also then if you do choose to use feeders, just please heed the advice we had given before, making sure you clean them and all of that. So nesting birds then. And again, like, natural sites are the best, but they're not always available. So there's some things we can do to bump up the availability of space. The nesting season is from March to August, give or take a little bit for some species that start a little bit earlier or go a bit late. But the hedge cutting ban is in place during this time, March to August, for that reason. And it's illegal to disturb birds while they're nesting, and this includes moving nests or birds and photographing birds. There's more information about this on our website. But these laws also extend to other species that you might be lucky enough to find nesting in your home, such as bats or pine martens. So it's important, especially if you're undertaking renovation works or the likes, to consider what nature is there. And also to consider specialist species like swifts and swallows and house martins that might be using those spaces. So one of the ways you can bump up the available space for nesting birds are nest boxes. And we have a really easy guide on our website as to how you can build these yourself. If you're handy with a saw and a drill, have at it. One of the things you need to consider is the different types of boxes that different species will use. So robins like open-fronted, but blue tits like a closed-fronted box with a little tiny opening. So just consider these things depending on what you're looking to encourage in your garden. And there are some species that won't just use these nest boxes, or will be nesting in other areas of the garden or around your space. So consider these also, such as swifts and house martins. And actually research has shown that with house martins, if they are building nests themselves on plastic fascia, that these will fall down more regularly. So actually, if you have a plastic fascia, it's more beneficial to house martins to put up an artificial box for them. These little cups that you see in the bottom corner. So that's quite an interesting one. It's just because they expend less energy than having to rebuild their nest every year. But one of the things you can also do to help boost them is provide a little mud patch, or if you're implementing your bog gardens or one of these water introducing actions, that can also help the likes of house martin that will scoop up little bits of mud in their mouth to make these little amazing cup nests. Yeah, so although through time the gardens have tended towards like neatness and tidiness, it's often the opposite of what nature wants and needs to thrive. So nature loves mess, and we can help accommodate this with various different actions. One of which is known as the hare's corner. So this is where you leave an untidy area to provide shelter for insects and small mammals. Yeah, it would be great to leave leaf litter, which protects the soil and overwintering insects. And actually, a lot of our nutrients come from these leaves being broken down. It's called humus. Earthworms will come up and grab it and bring it down and incorporate all its yummy nutrients into the soil. And then deadwood also supports fungi and beetles and birds, which will be in turn great for bats. So there's loads of beneficial cascading actions that can happen off the back of leaving wood to just naturally break down in your garden. And then you can signpost this area if you want to show it off proudly or let people know that it's intentional. And these are really good as well because it reduces your need to kind of manage things and keep these tidy areas. It affords you a little less effort. And also, traditionally in Irish farms, they always had rough edges and banks. So let's keep the tradition alive. I've already mentioned insects a lot because they are a food source for many different species. And they're a really, really crucial part of the food chain. And also, often they are gorgeous and really captivating to watch. However, their populations have crashed, and this is a really major problem. Often the example that's used is when you used to be driving down the motorway and your windshield would be covered with spotted insects, and you just don't have them anymore because the populations are on the floor. Over 30% of Ireland's bee populations alone, these species, over 30% of our wild bee species are now endangered. So like at risk of extinction due to habitat loss, starvation, and pesticide use. But with the right awareness and support, we can turn things around. We can provide water and plants. And actually an interesting piece of advice that I came across was to keep bee and insect hotels small if you're providing these within your garden. No bigger than the size of an average nest box, because bigger than that, they encourage the spread of disease and attract predators. Other actions that can be taken is to let your garden grow, let your grass grow. And this will help restore species-rich grasslands, which have been decimated in Ireland in recent decades. But they're a really vital habitat for providing shelter and food for pollinators. But even reducing mowing to once a month will help them return. It's just one pocket at a time. Which is what we need. All these little positive actions just building up to a more stable, more healthy environment. And then wildflowers, which are having a moment the last few years, but I love them. I love the look of all the varied colors and heights. I think it's beautiful. This mosaic of habitats is really appealing to me. But yeah, wildflower patches are they're suitable for sunny areas. Ideally in low fertility is what they like and where they'll grow. But they can be as big and small as you like. You can choose. The pollinator plan from National Biodiversity Data Centre recommend patience over packets because these wildflower seed mixes can often contain a lot of non-native species. But there's a free underground seed bank that can be tapped into with just a little bit of work and a little bit of patience. Yeah. The Biodiversity in Urban Gardens Sheffield bugs study surveyed 52 lawns and found that 159 different species of flowering plants existed there. And overall, the species numbers per square meter was similar to semi-natural wildflower meadows. So just demonstrating that gardens and urban spaces can be really impactful and really meaningful. And a lot of the plant species that are found there survive on frequently mown lawns by growing horizontally through the soil. So they produce these rhizomes and runners. So when you stop mowing, you'll see that they burst into life. And then if you want to foster a wildflower meadow in your own garden, there's two options that two approaches you can take: short flowering meadow or a long flowering meadow. So a short flowering meadow is cut very regularly, and after the dandelions flowers is the advice. You can get creative with the shape of the path that you cut through these to make it feel like a bit of an adventure and really create a feature in your garden. This method is advised for gardens that are a bit tidier and public lands where there's kind of more support for tidier biodiversity initiatives. And then long flowering meadows are just cut once a year. So this allows seeds to drop in early September. And then it's much easier to move the cuttings if you let them dry before lifting them. This requires patience for the soil fertility to really reduce, but it does cater to a wider variety of species, and it provides more cover. So there's food for longer periods of time with this method. One really impactful plant, if we had to choose one, is yellow rattle. It's known as the meadow maker. It's hemiparasitic, so the roots attach to the roots of other plants, especially grasses, and draws nutrients from them. So this can reduce grass species up to 60%, which gives other species like and other wildflowers a chance to grow. And you might even end up with orchids and some other really special plants in your garden. But if you're using the seeds, don't use ones collected from this year because they don't store well. And then keep removing the cuttings until the end of February, so that it's short when the yellow rattle is germinating from February to April. So yeah, meadows are really important, and the research has shown it. A couple of UK examples. The Plant Life UK has found that the typical meadow contains 570 flowers per square meter, which support nearly 1,400 invertebrate species. And they store up to 500 times more carbon than fields dominated just by grass species alone. Lowland Britain found that of the 7 million acres of meadow that existed in 1930s, only 2% of them are left. And here in Ireland, the National Parks and Wildlife Service found that 30% of our best quality meadows were lost over just a 6-year period. So they're one of the most threatened habitats in Ireland. And that figure may well have changed, presumably for the worse, since that guide was produced. Maybe it has changed for the best, but time will tell. Yeah, so connectivity is something to consider with habitats in general. Like isolated little pockets can provide for things, but they can have a lot more impact if they're actually connected to the wider area. Or hedgehogs, for example, will come into your garden a lot more if they can get into it from other spaces and have safe avenues like hedgerows to travel along. And a lot of things need this connectivity. squirrels and bats, hedgehogs, and like even birds. They don't like these big open spaces where they're really exposed. So it's important to have these little wildlife corridors that they can move through. And yeah, that fragmentation just leads to isolation. So good to consider how you can connect to other things. If you're looking at your garden and mapping it out, maybe look on Google Maps and have a look around your area and see what's around you that can be utilized as well. Hedgehogs can be invited into the garden. There's no guarantee that they'll move in, but if you leave log piles and things for nesting and feeding, it'll be more likely. Avoid using slug pellets and pesticides. Also providing a range of food, because they don't only feed on slugs and snails. They try not to eat too many of them, but they will eat them, so they are a gardener's friend as well. And providing water and also reporting them when you see them, like the National Biodiversity Data Centre, because we have an indication that they're declining, but we do need more information on our hedgehogs and their distribution. And then bats rely heavily on insects, and wildlife gardening can really benefit them. But also consider light. Try not to have lights that are shining up into the sky, because this can block their feeding. So have lights low down if you need to. Never shine light on water. And you can provide bat boxes. And also we have a guide on DIY bat boxes on our website as well. Even balconies where you're like supporting night scented plants can be really important, and important to consider as well that bats are legally protected if you are lucky enough to have a roost in your house. Something really helpful that you can do for your garden and for your gardening efforts is to just let nature do its thing. Like, it can provide a lot of beneficial action for you as well. So song thrushes, for example, love to eat snails. But they need to crack their shells. So they tend to use this little dedicated stone anvil. So if you leave out a stone that'll be good for cracking shells in your garden, or maybe a few, they will be more likely to come in and use and to eat up your snails. So yeah, if you do this, have a look for the little crushed piles of snail shells, and you'll know they've been there. Also, insects like ladybirds can control aphids, so leave out your nettles to foster them. And generally, as we saw demonstrated earlier, healthy ecosystems prevent pest population explosions. It keeps things much more level. So if you have a mosaic of habitats within your own garden, that will also be the same there to keep pest populations at bay. Avoid chemicals wherever you can, and just remember that diversity equates to resilience in our gardens. There is also a permaculture trick of planting trap crops, such as nasturtiums. I'm pretty sure I've said that wrong. To deter the likes of slugs from your veg gardens. So, look into the natural options for deterring pests that might be eating your crop plants and your veggies. Pets. Cats are a really major predator of garden birds. They take a lot of garden birds. So keep your cats indoors at dawn and dusk when birds are most active is the advice. If you can, employ a catio. Also keep your dogs inside at those times, or any pet you have that's going to interfere with birds. And place any feeders and nest boxes high away from fences. The same for bat boxes and other things that you employ for your wildlife in your garden. And for cats, avoid using bells alone, because they can adapt to hunting with these and make them more efficient hunters. So containment works best, and to keep them indoors at those times. Reduce hazards like netting. If you must use it in your garden, keep it taut. For decorative webbing, such as like Halloween spider webs, avoid using them, because wildlife gets trapped up in them. And just generally reduce any of the chemical threats that might be around. And if you do have chemicals, store them securely so wildlife doesn't accidentally get into them. Window strikes can be a really serious problem for birds. Across Europe, 100 million birds die annually from window strikes. In some cases, this will be because of skyrise buildings, etc., but it does happen regularly in gardens. This is because they see the trees reflected in the window and they think they can fly right through, but they smack into it and they either get stunned or they often die. If you find a stunned bird, you can keep it in a dark box with air holes, obviously, until it comes to. And if it looks like it needs more help, get in touch with rehabilitation organisations like Kildare Wildlife Rescue. Actually, also birds, male birds at this time of year can be very territorial in springs, and they will sometimes pick a fight with their own reflection, thinking that it's a competing male. So any of these actions that you take to break up the image will also help with that, because it can be quite a source of annoyance for people at this time of the year, the constant pecking at the window. And then yeah, once you've provided all this nature in your garden and you're hooked on the different species that you come across, another way that you can like elevate this action and contribute to helping biodiversity in Ireland is to contribute to citizen science. So this is where the public contribute data, and it's an area where even like amateur observers can have a huge impact. You don't have to be a skilled ornithologist or entomologist. Or what have you. You can just be the average Joe who loves their garden wildlife. So it's a great way to contribute to science and help us understand more of what's going on with our wildlife in Ireland, and can be really good fun. Our most popular annual survey is the Garden Bird Survey, and it's Ireland's longest running citizen science survey, which runs for 13 weeks each winter from December to February. And it helps us gather large amounts of really valuable info about our wild bird populations. And it's a great way to find out what's around your garden and your school, and to get your eye in on what species are there. Bird track is also a way that you can record your species throughout the year. And you can do this in your garden or when you're out and about. And it supports conservation across Britain and Ireland. BirdWatch Ireland are partners with a number of UK partners. And this helps track migration timings and population trends, and will also allow you to see what other birds people are recording in the area too. It's free and easy to use via either an app or on the web. And it really helps people create a deeper connection with local wildlife. And if you are looking to get into identification and like further your skills in identification, recording them is a really good way to help you lock in on the different species. Okay, so speaking of identification, I'll throw you in the deep end and do a little quiz. Don't worry. I'm gonna show 4 silhouettes and see if you can identify them. Give you a few seconds. Any idea? Okay, so I'm sure most people got that. It's a bit of a silly thing. Lighten the mood at the end of a long talk, but the point is that identification can be really intimidating, and some people will not even try because they think they can't do it and it's too much. But I want to tell you that you absolutely do have the skills to identify things, regardless of what it is, regardless of what your interest group is. Our brains are built to recognize patterns. They're built to build up this recognition of things over time. Without even thinking, I guarantee pretty much everybody, if not everybody, knew what these were just from some space. And that's just a little screen drawing. Okay, so this one actually includes real birds. Which one of these is the long-tailed tit? And it was mentioned earlier in the thing, but earlier in the talk. And then can you name the other bird? So of course the long-tailed tit is number 2. Sometimes birds just, it does what it says on the tin, and the name is really helpful. So there's a lot of easy wins when you get into it. and start to look things up, and absolutely take those wins. And on your little list, I can identify a long-tailed tit now, and number one is a robin, which I reckon most people know. So you know, you've already got a lot more species in your repertoire than you'll realize. But if you want to get deeper into recognition, which is not a necessity, but if it's something that interests you, I recommend picking one of these common species and just get to know them really well. How they sound, what do they look like, how do they move, what kind of things are they eating in my garden? Are there differences between the male and female? Which there isn't for robin. And are there any kind of little iconic moves that they make? So with robins, for example, often when they land and perch on something, they'll do this little sticking their tail up in the air, often with their little call. So don't just get to know their songs. The calls, I would say, are possibly even more important because you're going to hear these more regularly. With a chaffinch, its call goes pink pink, which correlates with the male's pink breast. So it's a nice little moniker to remember it. And blackbirds, they have this alarm call that they will, when they explode out from a bush, when they've been disturbed, that they will give out that alarm call. So definitely get your ear on those things and pick your species. And if you want one simple action that you can do when you to go away with today, Donna Mullen's really good little book. It's wonderful read, very accessible. Make Your Home a Nature Reserve. She goes through lots of different species and things that you can do in your garden. This is inspired by her. This is how she ends the book, is to choose one animal that you're going to dedicate the year to and consider how you're going to provide it with food, water, and a space to live in your home. And you can also help by becoming a member of BirdWatch Ireland, and you get lots of goodies when you do. So you get the Wings magazine, which is our only kind of bird dedicated magazine in Ireland. 3 times a year, you get bird detectives for kid and family memberships. And when you join, you get this wonderful little pocket guide, which is actually pocket size, on the common birds of Ireland. So yeah, scan the QR code and become a member today if you're not already. If you are, thank you so much, because it means a lot to us, makes a really big difference. You're Mohabit. Thank you for listening. Sorry, it was long. We'll take any questions now, just to say thanks to the various photographers.